Hi, so thanks for coming to my channel. I'm going to be encompassing a lot of different subjects in this video. So really it's only going to scratch the surface, as I think to really look at every nuance of this issue in detail are a very long video. So to get straight to the point, I want to talk about how woke orthodoxy, woke ideology, in my opinion, is incredibly detrimental to Western liberal democracies. Um, the whole idea of woke is quite a relatively new phenomenon. I would say it's been particularly popularized in 2020. It's been going on for a few years, and it's kind of the term itself, as I understand it, has its origins in the 1970s um, with the sort of black identity movements of those days, i.e., being woke, being awakened to the truth, to the light of injustice. That's actually what its origins are. Um, to those who think that the term is used in a disparaging way, I would suggest that the people I'm talking about use the term themselves. They see it as a positive thing. So, when they come out with comments like stay woke, this isn't a term of abuse, but it is controversial. Um, and I suspect that the majority of people are fed up with it. Does this mean that the majority of people are right-wing reactionaries? No, I really don't think it is. I think there are many people who would describe themselves as fairly left-wing who are tired of this. And in the last few days, we've had several more examples of it. So Bernardo's, the children's charity, has been accused of virtue signalling by a group of Tory MPs, including Esther McVeigh. She herself had benefited from Bernardo's as a child. And as she put it, that's why she is disappointed at the direction it's taken. So basically, the vice president of the charity, I'm just reading here from the Times, David Bernardo, I imagine he's related to the original Dr. Thomas Bernardo, said it was as committed as ever to representing and advocating for all vulnerable children. That sounds good, but could not be colourblind. And so his rationale for this was to publish a blog on the Bernardo's website telling parents how to explain white privilege to their children. This is from one of the country's biggest children's charities. Um, to me, this has a lot of echoes of Simon Henderson at Eton, whereby an individual is so convinced that they have moral righteousness that their counter to criticism is to claim that they are being open minded, to not even attempt to understand the contention. Um, And this is how he justifies it. Whilst poverty and disadvantage is a reality for children from all backgrounds, colours, and creeds across our UK services day in and day out, we see that black, Asian, and minority ethnic children should face additional challenges as well, he said, giving the examples of being treated less fairly at school by employers and by the criminal justice system. Well, some of those things would require, I would suggest, more evidence. For example, by employers. Well, it's illegal to discriminate on the grounds of race. That's illegal. Um, the justice system, again, you'd have to look at what is the ratio of crimes being committed into one before getting into something like that. But even if you go with that and you say, yes, those are examples of institutional racism, the term white privilege, as I've said before, is an incredibly obnoxious concept. Because it treats an entire demographic as one and the same. And I think it's outrageous that the vice president of a major children's charity is using this sort of polarizing language and claiming it is about tolerance. Frankly, David Bernardo should be ashamed of himself for pushing that, because the term white privilege literally denotes that all white people are one and the same, and all white people are privileged. Now, this is a man who works for a charity that deals with vulnerable children, as he said, from all backgrounds. So, but by putting that privilege adjective on it, he is saying that poor white children are privileged. Privilege denotes perks. Privilege denotes, it frankly denotes wealth. So I can understand him saying, okay, we need to focus on discrepancies that minority children face. But to use this obnoxious term white privilege, I'll be quite honest, I'm tempted to write to him and share my contentions. But anyway, that's one example. Black Lives Matter, the latest news around that. Dawn French has taken the knee, the actress Dawn French in Victor of Dibley. I haven't watched this particular episode, but apparently it was part of a plot and she gives a sermon on it, and co-stars have defended her. My view on that is if white celebrities want to virtue signal by taking the knee, it's up to them. But I don't think many people are going to be very impressed by injecting the politics of BLM into a popular sitcom. Black Lives Matter is a deeply divisive movement. This is proven by the fact that a Guardian study, okay, not the Daily Mail, not some right wing newspaper, the Guardian reported that 55% of the British public feel that Black Lives Matter have brought race relations backwards. And an increasing number of politicians are starting to speak out against it. George Eustace, the Conservative Environment Minister, has said that it is a political movement as he sees it. Again, I'm quoting from the Times. George Eustace said that in his opinion, the movement was different to what most of us believe, um, in which is standing up for racial equality. The Environment Secretary later said it was right that racism in football was called out and that if people chose to express their views in a particular way, that should always be respected. Now, this relates to the fact that during a football game the other day, I believe Millwall was involved. I don't know what the situation is regarding the social distancing and all of that. I imagine it's a limited crowd. But apparently, some players chose to take the knee and some fans booed them. Now, those fans have been widely criticised. Um, some have said, some have excused this by saying, well, Millwall has a reputation. It did have a reputation for football hooliganism and far right affiliations in the past. But again, there's an assumption, and Majid Nawaz made this point, that just because they're booing the stance, it must be motivated by racism. Has anyone actually asked those fans why they were booing? And I'm not saying it was right that they were booing, but instead of just saying, oh, it must be racism, how about considering maybe they don't like a political movement being brought onto the football pitch? And then my question, major question about that is, well, what about players who choose not to take the knee? Are they going to be kind of stigmatized as being, you know, not loyal to the cause? I remember when Lewis Hamilton urged his fellow drivers to take the knee. Well, what if they refuse to? Is Hamilton going to smear them as racists? There's something very troubling about the forced conformity of this. And people could say it's voluntary. If you're part of an organization or a sports team and you have someone who's very vocal about Black Lives Matter and they're pressuring others to take the knee, and you say, well, no, I don't want to take the knee because I see it as an act of subservience, then I would say it's borderline. It's like a cult, actually, that sort of forced conformity. To me, it's an utterly ridiculous gesture. I mean, look at the backlash that Dominic Raab got. A lot of people, I should say, support Dominic Raab, but he said, half jokingly, I would only take the knee for my wife when I'm proposing to her or the Queen. Um, and for that, he was accused of, well, all sorts of things. Why on earth should anyone take the knee for any cause? It's absolutely absurd. If you feel like taking the knee, go ahead. What you cannot do is impose that sort of thing onto other people. And that's what these woke people are doing. They're saying, I've literally heard this statement, if you don't support Black Lives Matter, you're a racist. So you can support the principles of Black Lives Matter. You could support the literal phrase Black Lives Matter. But if you don't support the movement, according to these people, you're a racist. So if you have a problem with racism within Black Lives Matter, as exhibited by the likes of Yusra Kagali, you're a racist. This is an upside down logic. It really, really is. But what I find most troubling of all with this woke orthodoxy that we're saying. I mean, this goes on. Eton, what happened at Eton? My question would be, if a feminist lecturer gave a seminar at an all-girls school about women's rights or about how women have it hard by the patriarchy, would she be fired? No, she would likely be promoted and praised. I believe the treatment of Will Nolan is a disgrace. Now, I watched that whole lecture. I can see that some points of it might be a little bit contentious. For example, his comments on rape, probably, I personally wouldn't have worded it that way. He was making the point that more men are raped in prison. It came across a little bit like he was downplaying rape against women, which was probably not the best words to use. But I don't see how anyone could look at that lecture and say that he was promoting hatred against women. He was simply saying that the narrative that feminists put out there is a misleading one. I think Simon Henderson has went down the path of moral cowardice by punishing Will Nolan for giving a lecture. It definitely tramples freedom of expression. It denies the boys of 18 a chance to think for themselves. Um, it's disgraceful. And Henderson can say what he wants, but it blatantly was an attempt to virtue signal. By the way, when I say people are virtue signaling, I don't necessarily think that they don't believe it. It might well be sincere belief, but it's simply a contradiction to say you are advocating for liberal ideals by silencing opinions that you don't like. And I think it's utterly disingenuous for Simon Henderson to claim that Eton allows diverse views. The fact of the matter is, a lecturer has been sacked because he delivered a lecture that was critical of third wave feminism. That's about the height of it. If people don't like his lecture, they can challenge him, have a debate about it. But to punish him, I think is deeply alarming. And then we look at how this is happening in legislation. In Scotland, Humsa Yusuf is really pushing for legislation that, left unchecked, will absolutely criminalise opinions. He wants to make it so that um, people can be criminalised in their own homes for wrong speak, i.e., for having politically incorrect views. He claims it's in order to clarify the law. Ironically, this all came about from trying to get rid of Scotland's old blasphemy laws, archaic blasphemy laws that are probably never used. Um, but what has come out of that is something even worse. It's more sweeping, more controlling. Look at what's happening with trans issues. Look at how women are being harassed and threatened with legal action if they insist that biology matters. Look at the hounding of J.K. Rowling. There are so many examples. So, this can't just be dismissed as paranoia or, oh, stop reading too much Daily Mail. I can find many different sources from this, including left-wing sources. And yes, it's true that this is the sort of thing the Daily Mail would pick up on. But you know what? So be it. I don't particularly like the Daily Mail, but if they are covering these issues when other papers aren't, then I'm not going to criticize them for that. These are important issues. But the thing that is most insufferable about this woke orthodoxy, it's worse than annoying. Okay, if it was just woke people coming out with their opinions, even if they were insulting people and smearing people as racist, I think that's very damaging, particularly if it's leveled against white people. But if it was just words and you could say, oh, well, they're wrong, and a bit of common sense and reason can show that they're wrong. But the biggest danger with all of this is how legislation is now coming into it. It's deeply alarming, deeply alarming. And I think, I mean, you have to consider if someone was coming out with the sort of views I have, if I tried to get selected by the Labour Party or even the Conservative Party tomorrow, or if an election was coming up, they would probably withhold that. They probably say I'm too outspoken, I'm too politically incorrect. Because the sad reality is, even the Conservatives, they inject a certain amount of virtue signalling and political correctness into what they deem to be acceptable for an MP. Now, in my line of thinking, an MP should be someone worked hard for their constituents, who is not corrupt, i.e., doesn't take dirty money and so on, and strives to work for the people who put them there. That's the job of an MP. And if they feel that there are issues in society that are detrimental, they should have the freedom to say that, obviously within reason. I mean, when we're talking about freedom of expression, obviously there's common sense limits. You can't allow a situation where someone's actively encouraging violence. And if a public figure is telling blatant lies or making irresponsible statements, they should get a backlash. An example of this is Laurent Fox, who I've often praised this year, but recently his attitude on he basically boasted about having a party. That was incredibly stupid and selfish and frankly elitist. So I'm not going to back Fox on that. That was a stupid thing to say. And if he does get if he gets a police knock on the door, I'm not going to sympathise with him on that one. Why should public figures have perks that the rest of us don't have? So, when people are stupid, they should be called out. When they say when they come out with falsehoods or they say reckless things, that should be challenged. So, if, for example, Will Nolan said something that was factually wrong, he should be picked up on that. But to simply sack him, I really think that we're going to limit opportunities in society if everyone is walking on eggshells. I'm not saying people should be obnoxious and unpleasant. I hate bullying. Okay, so freedom of speech shouldn't be used as an excuse to bully people. And then, I'm reminded of the Karl Popper tolerant paradox. The Austrian British philosopher Karl Popper theorized or put out this argument that if a society has unlimited tolerance, then it starts to tolerate the intolerant. That could be an interesting debate to bring into this thing, because ironically, when Western societies are so hung up on policing how people speak, and when wokes are so obsessed by things like cultural appropriation, which in my line of thinking is utter nonsense in most cases, they're so hell bent on focusing on these things, they're taking all their eye off the ball with actual intolerance. An example is Islamist intolerance. And also, I would suggest Russian and Chinese state malevolence. I mean, you just have to look at RT reports. They love this. They love what the West is doing to itself. Because what RT does is that then it swoops in and it takes the sort of populist approach that I've taken and says that, the British people reject this, the British people don't like X, Y, and Z. And it's not that what they're saying is wrong, but they're doing it with an agenda. RT couldn't care less about social tensions, racial tensions in the West. I would suggest RT thrives on it. They love it because it gives them an opportunity to say, "Oh, look how disordered the West is." So, actually, with their orthodoxy, what woke people are doing is enabling Chinese and Russian state aggression against Western society because they're then taking advantage of this. Because you can be absolutely sure that these sort of debates are not going on in China and Russia, at least not to the same extent. Maybe on a small scale, but not to the same extent. And they are more totalitarian, less tolerant societies. So, in my opinion, woke orthodoxy is not a plea for tolerance. It's not a plea for racial harmony. It's not a plea to treat everyone the same. Frankly, I think it's toxic. And it has to be said that conservative or right leaning people are far, far more likely to be censored. I'm sorry, but that's true. In university campuses, in academic institutions, particularly, even in the corridors of politics. You could get a black Labour MP advocate for Black Lives Matter. That's fine. You could get a white Conservative MP who criticise Black Lives Matter and they get condemned as a racist. There's absolutely double standards. The different treatment of Dr. Priyamvada Gopal and David Starkey is I was going to say Dr. David Starkey, but I think he's been stripped of his titles now. They both came out with racially charged statements. One gets sacked and attacked and condemned, the other gets praised. So, as a society, we cannot say we're against racism and sexism and other isms if we're going to turn a blind eye to some kinds of bigotry. I.e., if you're okay with anti male sexism, or you deny or are okay with anti white racism, you're part of the problem. As as a person, hopefully, who uses reason and logic, and someone who identifies with a political centrist, I try very hard to be consistent. When I see white racists, I vocally condemn them, and they do exist. There are some obnoxious people out there. When I say misogynist, I condemn that as well. But what I'm not going to do is apologise for calling out double standards and for criticising political movements like Black Lives Matter. And I find it deeply alarming that public figures basically need to be so careful. Because as soon as they take a line of saying, well, actually, I'm not going to go with this, that's certainly not a career winner, as the Lawrence Fox example shows. Chances are, if they're in entertainment, i.e., if they're an actor, they will suddenly find that they're no longer offered roles. If they're in politics, they will be likely censored by their party. And you can apply this to other areas as well. So I think that there is something deeply alarming going on here. And true liberals must resist this. By all means, this is not, by the way, advocacy for some sort of conspiracy theories or Trumpian style, oh, everything's fake news. I am dead opposed to that sort of mentality as well. So this shouldn't be interpreted as, I mean, this is one of my biggest critiques with the whole Trump phenomenon. I think a lot of Trump supporters think that Donald Trump is the only answer to oppose this. I think it's perfectly reasonable and compatible to have a big problem with woke ideology, but also have a big problem with Donald Trump. See him as, in my opinion, a disgraceful president. Um, it shouldn't be one or the other, two extremes. But I would suggest that woke orthodoxy is a threat to liberal societies. I really do. Because when this is coupled with threats of legislation, and when you get CEOs and vice presidents of major companies and charities pushing this narrative and they claim they're doing it for tolerance, they're not doing it for tolerance. They're doing it as an ideological part of an ideological agenda. They really are. There is nothing tolerant. I mean, David Bernardo saying that the way to tackle issues faced by minority children is to push the white privilege narrative. I mean, my goodness, this is a man who is one of the senior executives of a charity that deals with vulnerable children across the country. He, of all people, should know that there are many vulnerable white children. In a place like Sunderland, this is a majority white city. I Yesterday, I bought a hot drink and a sandwich for a homeless woman. She was white. You can find many examples of this. So the idea of white privilege is an insult. It's, I think it's disgusting actually, because it is used by people who are being racist, but it's a way to deflect their own racism by saying, "Oh well, I'm calling out the injustice." No, you're not. You're you're throwing gasoline on the fire because it assumes that all people, all white people, can be judged as one and the same, that their individual life experiences are all one and the same. It's obnoxious in the extreme. And things like this, I would just say that when politicians, for example, when Keir Starmer took the knee, that was ridiculous. Keir Starmer's an intelligent man. I don't know why he felt the need to do that. And now there's reports that Black Lives Matter has anti-Semitic um, pockets within BLM are anti-Semitic. So Starmer, I think, made a big mistake doing that. And if I was the leader of the Labour Party, I would be distancing myself from this movement. Unfortunately, Joe Biden and the Democrats have really got cozy with Black Lives Matter. But I think the American situation is even worse than ours right now. It's so Biden's talked repeatedly about unifying the nation. Well, That's good rhetoric. It's a lot more responsible than Trump's rhetoric, but he needs to show that by frankly distancing his party from Black Lives Matter. But then they have an internal problem because progressives and the likes of Black Lives Matter have helped Biden get elected. Sort of set himself up to a trap, I think, in that sense. Anyway, I'm going to run this up, but I find myself deeply frustrated with these issues, and I know I'm not the only one. But that's the crazy situation. Millions of people feel the same way as me. Yet, if you're a public figure, or anyone for that matter, and you come out with anything deemed to be not progressive, then you're going to find yourself vilified, denounced, and censured. It's deeply, deeply alarming. As a society, we have to have the confidence to allow controversial opinions. And if people find those opinions contentious, then they can debate them, challenge them. This, to me, is a very basic core of a liberal society. And as for Popper's analysis of allowing intolerance, I think that's an interesting thing to bring into this because there's going to be a lot of question marks around that and how does that relate to this? What I would suggest is we are cracking down on things we shouldn't be cracking down on, and we are tolerating things that we really should be opposing, and the wokes just don't see it.